She looked me in the eye and said, "There was nothing left for you. No hesitation. No apology. Just final." We were sitting in my parents' living room, the same one where my grandmother used to knit in the corner chair every Sunday. And my mother said it like it was a simple fact. Like the conversation was already over. My sister was sitting beside her, quiet, hands folded in her lap, not surprised, not confused, just comfortable. That's what stayed with me, not what my mother said, but how normal it seemed to everyone else in the room. I remember asking once more, carefully, just to be sure I had heard it right. "So, there's nothing at all?" My father didn't even look up.
"No," he said. "And that was it."
No documents. No explanation. No details. Just a closed door. 3 months later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. And everything I thought I understood about that conversation started to unravel. My grandmother wasn't the kind of woman people overlooked. She had a presence that didn't need volume, didn't need attention. When she walked into a room, things just settled, like everything knew where it was supposed to be. I spent a lot of time with her growing up, more than my sister did, not because my parents planned it that way. It just happened. I was quieter as a child, less demanding, easier to leave somewhere for a few hours. And my grandmother never made me feel like I was being left. She made it feel like I had been chosen. We had routines, small ones, consistent ones. Tea in the afternoon. Even when I was too young to like it, she'd still pour me a cup. Mostly milk, a little tea, and I would sit across from her pretending I understood what she was talking about. She never corrected me, never told me I was too young. She just included me. My sister was different, louder, more expressive, the kind of child people naturally paid attention to. My parents responded to that. They always had. Not unfairly, just naturally. She needed more, and they gave more. That's how it always felt. Even growing up, it wasn't something we talked about, but it was there. In the way decisions were made, in who got asked what they wanted, in who didn't need to ask at all. I learned early on how to be easy, how to not complicate things, how to take what was given and not reach for more. My grandmother noticed that. She never said it directly, but I could feel it in how she treated me. More patient, more intentional, like she saw something in me that didn't need to compete to exist. When I got older, our relationship didn't fade. It deepened, quietly. We spoke often, not about big things, not about family dynamics, just life, work, people. Small observations that somehow meant more when shared with her. She asked questions in a way that made me think. Not defend, not explain, just think. And when I answered, she listened. Really listened. Like what I said mattered. Even when it was something small. My sister visited her too. Of course she did. But it was different. More occasional. More social. She would bring things. Gifts, updates, stories. And my grandmother welcomed that. But with me, it was never about bringing anything. I just showed up, and that was enough. Toward the end, I started going more often. Not because anyone asked me to, but because something in me felt like I should. Like time was becoming something you noticed instead of something you assumed. She never talked about being sick in detail. She didn't like being the center of concern. But there were moments, small ones, where I could see the effort it took her to do things that used to be easy. Pouring tea, standing up, even holding a conversation for too long. So I adjusted, stayed longer, talked less, listened more. And one afternoon, a few weeks before she passed, she said something that didn't fit into our usual rhythm. We were sitting by the window. The light was soft, quiet. She looked at me and said, "You've always understood more than you say." I didn't know how to respond to that, so I just smiled. But she didn't look away. "Make sure you don't let that be used against you," she added. It was the only time she ever said something like that. Direct, almost deliberate. I remember thinking it was an unusual thing to say, but I didn't question it. I didn't ask her what she meant. I just let it pass, like I had done with so many things. A few weeks later, she was gone. The house felt different immediately, quieter in a way that wasn't peaceful. Just empty. We had the funeral. Family came. People said what people always say. She lived a good life. She was loved. She will be missed. And all of it was true. But none of it really captured what it felt like to lose someone who had been quietly anchoring you your whole life. After everything settled, my parents told us we would sit down and go over her will. Not immediately. They said there were things to handle first. Paperwork. Formalities.
Time.
I didn't push. I trusted them. It never occurred to me that I would need to ask for clarity, or proof, or anything beyond what they told me, because they were my parents, and this was my grandmother. And some things you don't expect to be complicated. But looking back now, I realize the first moment something didn't sit right came much earlier than I admitted to myself. It was in the way my sister already seemed to know how things were going to be divided. At the time, I told myself I was imagining it, that I was reading too much into something small. Grief does that. It makes everything feel heavier, more meaningful than it actually is. At least, that's what I believed. A few days after the funeral, my sister came over to my parents' house. I was already there, helping my mother go through some of my grandmother's things. Nothing formal, just small items. Clothes, books, things that didn't feel like they needed a process. My sister walked in like she had somewhere specific to be. Not rushed, but purposeful. She greeted everyone, kissed my mother on the cheek, sat down, and within minutes she was asking about specific items.
Jewelry.
A watch. A set of silverware I didn't even know existed. Not generally. Not did she leave anything behind.
Specific.
As if she already knew what was there. I remember pausing.
Just slightly.
Because it didn't match the moment. We hadn't even had the official conversation yet. Nothing had been explained. Nothing had been read. But she wasn't asking like someone waiting to find out. She was asking like someone confirming details. My mother answered her easily, without hesitation, without needing to check anything. Yes, that's been taken care of. I'll give that to you later. It's already set aside. Set aside. I noticed the phrasing, but I didn't question it. Not out loud. I just stayed quiet.
Watched.
Listened. My father barely spoke. He was going through paperwork at the dining table, occasionally nodding, occasionally adding something small, but mostly distant, like this was something already decided, and he was just present for it. I told myself there was probably an explanation. Maybe they had discussed things with her earlier. Maybe my grandmother had mentioned things before she passed. Maybe this was all more organized than I realized. That made sense. That felt reasonable. So I let it go.
Again.
Over the next couple of weeks, I started noticing other things. Subtle ones. Easy to overlook if you weren't paying attention. My sister began wearing one of my grandmother's rings. Not a casual piece. Something older. Something she never took off. I recognized it immediately. I asked her about it once. Lightly. Oh, I didn't know that was being given out already. She smiled. Not guilty. Not defensive. Just easy. Mom said I could take it. That was it. No explanation beyond that. No acknowledgement that maybe I should have known. I nodded. Smiled back. Because that's what I did. I kept things smooth. But something in me had started keeping track. Not consciously. Just noticing patterns. Items disappeared from the house slowly. Not all at once. Not in a way that would raise attention. Just little things. A painting. A jewelry box. A set of dishes. Each time, there was a simple explanation. Oh, Your sister took that. She needed it. It made sense. Made sense. That phrase again. Everything was being framed as logical, practical, reasonable. And every time I felt that small hesitation, I pushed it down. Because nothing had been officially discussed yet.
The will hadn't been read.
We were still waiting. So technically nothing had happened. That's what I told myself. Until one evening, about a month later, we were all sitting together again. Same living room. Same quiet tone. And my mother said something that shifted everything. Casually. Like it had already been understood. Most of your grandmother's things have already been sorted.
Sorted.
I looked at her, trying to process what that meant. What do you mean? I asked. Still calm. Still careful. She didn't hesitate. We've distributed what needed to be distributed. Distributed. I glanced at my sister. She didn't look surprised. Didn't look curious. Just neutral. Like she had already moved past this part. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not sharp. Not overwhelming. Just steady. So, what's left? I asked. That's when my mother looked at me, in that familiar way. Gentle. Controlled. Like she was about to say something that she had already decided I would accept. Not much, she said. And then she moved on. Changed the subject. Like that answered everything. And for a moment, I let her. Because that's what I had always done. Accepted incomplete answers. Trusted the tone instead of the content. But later that night, when I was alone, that quiet feeling didn't go away. It stayed. Persistent. Uncomfortable. Because for the first time, I couldn't ignore what I was seeing. This wasn't just things being handled. This was something being decided, without me. And I had no idea how much had already been taken off the table before I even knew there was a table to sit at. The actual conversation didn't happen right away. They waited, which, at the time, felt respectful, like they were giving things time to settle. Now, I understand, it gave them time to organize everything without me. 2 weeks later, my mother called. Her tone was light, almost casual. We should sit down and go through everything, she said. Like this was something structured.
Transparent. Fair.
I remember feeling relieved. Because whatever had felt unclear before would finally be explained. I went over that evening. The house felt the same. Nothing different on the surface. But something underneath it felt settled. Like decisions had already been made and accepted. We sat in the living room. Same seats as always. My mother on the main chair. My father beside her. My sister across from me. And again, that quiet familiarity. Like I had stepped into something already in motion. My mother had a folder in her lap. Neatly closed. Resting on her knees. I remember focusing on it. Because it felt like the center of everything. That was where the answers would be. That was where things would finally make sense. She opened it slowly, looked down, turned a page, and then closed it again, without showing me anything, without taking anything out. That's when something in me went still, not anxious, not emotional, just alert. She looked up at me and said, "There's nothing left for you," just like that. No explanation attached, no lead-in, no context. Just the conclusion. I didn't react immediately, because my mind was trying to reconcile what I had expected with what I was hearing. "What do you mean?" I asked. My voice sounded calm, but I could feel the shift inside me. She sighed lightly, like she had anticipated that question. "Your grandmother made specific decisions before she passed," she said. "And most of her assets were allocated to your sister." Allocated. Such a clean word. So official. But still, no detail. "And the rest?" I asked. "Used for expenses," she replied. Again. Simple. Complete. Final. I glanced at my father, waiting for something. A document. A clarification. Anything that grounded what she was saying. But he didn't move. He didn't reach for the folder. He didn't add anything. He just nodded slightly, like the conversation didn't need anything else. I turned to my sister. She held my gaze for a moment, then looked down at her hands. Not confused, not surprised, just avoiding. And that was the moment something became clear. Not in words, just instinct. If everything was straightforward, there would be nothing to avoid. I looked back at my mother. "Can I see the will?" I asked. She didn't hesitate. "No, that's already been handled," she said.
Handled, not shown.
Not explained.
Handled.
"I'd still like to see it," I said.
Still calm.
Still controlled. But this time, I didn't soften it. She gave me a small smile, the kind that was meant to reassure. "We've taken care of everything properly," she said. Same tone, same phrasing, but still not an answer. I felt that familiar instinct rise again, the one that told me to let it go,
To trust.
to not make this bigger than it needed to be. But this time, I didn't follow it.
I just sat there.
Not arguing, not agreeing, just present in the silence. "What expenses?" I asked.
She paused. Just slightly.
Then began listing them. Funeral, medical bills, property maintenance. All reasonable, all expected. But the way she said them felt constructed, like she was building an explanation in real time, not recalling something that had already been clear. "And that used everything?" I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. "Yes," she said. I nodded slowly, not because I believed her, but because I understood something now. This wasn't a discussion. There was no process being shared, no transparency being offered, just a version of events, delivered calmly enough that it was supposed to be accepted without question. The room went quiet, heavier this time, like everyone was waiting for me to respond in a specific way, to agree, to move on, to keep things smooth. And for a moment, I almost did, because that had always been my role. But something held, something I didn't override, and it changed everything. "I see," I said.
Simple.
Neutral, but not agreement. I stood up slowly, not abruptly, just enough to signal that I wasn't staying in that version of the conversation. "I need some time to think," I added. No one stopped me. No one tried to explain further. And that silence followed me all the way out. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, replaying everything. The words, the pauses, the way no one had actually shown me anything. And the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. They weren't explaining anything, because they didn't expect me to question it. And for the first time in my life, I didn't know if I was more hurt by what they did, or by how certain they were that I would never challenge it. Be honest, would you have just accepted that and walked away too? I didn't call anyone that night. Not my parents, not my sister, not even Rachel. I just sat with it, and that was unfamiliar, because usually I would have tried to resolve it quickly, find a way to make it feel reasonable, to reduce the tension, to explain it back to myself in a way that didn't require confrontation. But this time, I didn't want relief. I wanted clarity. I wanted to understand why something that sounded so simple felt so incomplete. I sat on my couch for a long time, phone beside me, lights off, letting the quiet stretch without interrupting it. And slowly things started arranging themselves differently in my mind. Not emotionally, not dramatically, just more honestly. They hadn't shown me anything. That was the part that wouldn't move. No document, no numbers, no names, no breakdown, just words. And not even detailed ones. Carefully vague, carefully final. I had accepted things like that my entire life. Trusted tone over content. Trusted intention over proof. But now, that pattern felt visible. And once it was visible, I couldn't unsee it. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Not restless. Not anxious. Just clear. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and instead of replaying what they said, I started looking at what they didn't say. That felt different, more grounded, more real. If everything had been handled properly, there would be a record, not just a conversation, not just an explanation, something tangible, something that existed outside of their version of events. That thought stayed steady. It didn't fade, didn't soften. It just sat there, waiting to be followed. So, I did something I had never done before. I stopped assuming I needed permission to understand something that involved me. I went through my messages with my grandmother, slowly, not searching for anything specific, just noticing her tone, her habits, the way she spoke about things. There was nothing about money, nothing about division, nothing that suggested everything had already been decided. That didn't prove anything, but it also didn't support what I had been told. Then I remembered something small. So small I had dismissed it at the time. A conversation from months earlier. We had been sitting in her living room, tea between us. She mentioned updating some paperwork. I hadn't asked what kind. She hadn't explained. She just said, "It's important things are written clearly." At the time, it felt like something people say as they get older. Now, it felt like something more deliberate. I sat back in my chair. Let that memory settle properly this time. And then the name came back to me. Mr. Harris. She had said it once, briefly, like it didn't need explanation. I opened my email, searched her name, scrolled through months of messages. Nothing. Then I checked older ones. Still nothing. But the name stayed, clear enough that I trusted it. I could have stopped there. Told myself I was overthinking, that this would only create distance, that maybe it wasn't worth turning something quiet into something complicated. But that thought didn't hold the same weight anymore, because this wasn't about creating conflict. It was about understanding truth, and whether I had been intentionally kept away from it. I picked up my phone, typed the name into a search, scrolled through results, law firms, profiles, directories, until one stood out. Same name, same city, same age range she had once mentioned. It wasn't certainty, but it was enough. I stared at the number for a moment, not hesitating, just acknowledging what it meant, because this wasn't just a call. This was a decision to step out of something I had been part of my entire life. The version of me that accepted things as they were presented, that trusted without verifying, that stayed quiet to keep things smooth. And once I stepped out of that, there was no returning to it. But instead of fear, I felt something else. Relief. Quiet. Grounded. Like something was finally aligning properly. I pressed call, held the phone to my ear, listened to it ring. Once. Twice. 3 times. Each ring stretching just enough to make the moment feel real. Then someone answered. Professional. Calm. Steady. I introduced myself. Gave my grandmother's full name. There was a pause. Not confusion. Recognition. "Yes," he said. "I was expecting to hear from you." That sentence didn't land immediately. But when it did, something inside me shifted again. Not sharply. Just deeper. Because I hadn't told anyone I was making this call. No one knew. And yet, he had been expecting me. I felt my grip on the phone tighten slightly. Not out of fear. Out of focus. "I think there's been some confusion," I said. Measured. Careful. He didn't interrupt. Didn't question. He just listened. And then he said something that made everything my parents told me feel incomplete. "There shouldn't be any confusion," he replied. "I've been trying to reach you for quite some time." I didn't respond right away, because in that moment, everything connected. The missing documents, the avoided answers, the closed folder, the certainty in their tone. It all rearranged itself into something much clearer. And for the first time, I wasn't trying to understand what I had been told. I was about to hear what had actually been written. I didn't speak right away. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted to hear him first.
Completely.
Without interrupting. Without shaping it into something easier. I was under the impression you had already been informed, he continued. His tone didn't change. Still professional. Still steady. But there was something underneath it now. A quiet awareness that something hadn't been handled properly. I haven't, I said. Simple.
Clear.
No explanation attached. There was a brief pause. Paper shifting on his end. A keyboard maybe. Then, your grandmother left very clear instructions, he said.
Clear.
That word landed differently this time. Not vague. Not softened. Just direct. She had a will, along with a separate document outlining specific distributions. I didn't move. Didn't react. Just listened. Because now, this wasn't about guessing anymore. It was about facts. She named both you and your sister, he continued. Equal tone. Equal weight. No hesitation between the names. And something in my chest settled. Not relief.
Not yet.
Just confirmation that what I had been told didn't match reality. She also specified that all communication regarding her estate should be delivered to both of you directly. That part stayed with me. Directly. Not through my parents. Not filtered. Not interpreted. Directly. I sent multiple notices, he added. Emails. Letters. All documented. All unanswered. I felt that quiet clarity sharpen again. Because now there was a timeline. An effort made. And something intercepted. I'd like to see everything, I said. Still calm. Still measured. Of course, he replied. No resistance. No hesitation. I'll resend all documents immediately. Within minutes, my phone buzzed. Then again. Then again. Emails. Attachments. Subject lines with dates.
Clear. Organized.
Undeniable. I opened the first one slowly. Not rushing. Not skimming. Just reading. Line by line. My grandmother's name. The date. The structure of the document. And then the details. Assets listed.
Accounts.
Property. Personal items. All clearly outlined. Nothing vague. Nothing ambiguous. Everything exactly where it was supposed to be. And then I saw it. My name. Not hidden. Not minimized. Not secondary. Equal. Intentional. Present throughout the entire document. I read it twice. Then a third time. Not because I didn't understand, but because I needed to fully take in what I was seeing. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't the technicality. It wasn't something open to interpretation. It was clear. And it had been clear from the beginning. I looked at the timestamps on the emails. Weeks ago. Then earlier. Then even before my grandmother passed. He had been trying to reach me.
Consistently.
And I had never seen a single message. I checked my inbox again. Searched for his name. Nothing.
Checked spam.
Nothing. That's when it settled completely. This wasn't just information being withheld. It had been redirected. Controlled. Decided before I ever had the chance to respond. I sat back in my chair. Phone still in my hand. Not overwhelmed. Not emotional. Just steady. Because now I wasn't questioning anything. I knew. Daniel was sitting across from me. Watching quietly. Not asking. He didn't need to. I turned the phone toward him. Let him read. He took his time. Didn't rush. Didn't react immediately. Just absorbed it. Then he looked up at me. And nodded once. Not surprised. Just confirming what we both already understood. I picked up the phone again. Scrolled through the documents one more time. And something else became clear. This wasn't complicated. Not legally. Not structurally. It had only been made complicated by being hidden. I'd like to move forward, I said when I returned to the call. Of course, Mr. Harris replied. We can begin the formal process immediately. Formal process. Another phrase that felt grounding instead of vague. He explained everything.
Step by step.
What needed to be filed, what needed to be acknowledged, what would happen next. No pressure, no urgency, just clarity. And, for the first time since all of this started, I wasn't reacting to something unclear. I was moving forward with something solid. When the call ended, I didn't rush to confront anyone. I didn't feel the need to, because this wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about allowing the truth to exist, without being filtered. I gathered the documents, organized them, saved everything, and then I sat there for a moment.
Quiet.
Present. Because the next step wasn't emotional. It wasn't reactive. It was inevitable. And this time, I wasn't stepping into a conversation unprepared. I was stepping into it with everything they had tried to keep from me. I didn't call them right away, not because I was unsure, but because for the first time, I didn't feel rushed. Nothing was slipping away anymore. Nothing was being decided without me. That alone changed how I moved. I gave it a day. Let everything settle properly. Not emotionally, just clearly. Then the next afternoon, I drove over.
Same street.
Same house. Same quiet familiarity that used to make everything feel automatic. But this time, I noticed things differently. The door, the windows, the stillness inside. Like I was walking into something I had finally learned how to see. My mother opened the door.
She smiled when she saw me. Warm.
Controlled. Unchanged. Hi, she said. Like this was just another visit. Like nothing had shifted. I stepped inside slowly.
Set my bag down. Didn't sit.
Didn't move further into the house. I spoke to the lawyer, I said. And that was enough. The air changed immediately. Not dramatically. Just tighter. My father looked up from the table. My sister, already on the couch, went completely still. My mother blinked once, then nodded. I see, she said. Measured.
Careful.
I didn't realize that was necessary. There it was. That soft reframing. That quiet attempt to bring things back into her version. It was, I said. No explanation. No edge. Just fact. I reached into my bag, took out the documents, placed them on the table between us. Neatly. Deliberately. Not as proof. Just as something that existed now, whether anyone wanted it to or not. The will is very clear, I said. I didn't walk her through it. Didn't point to anything. I didn't need to. Because the moment those papers touched the table, the version she had given me stopped holding. My father leaned forward slightly, looked at the top page. Didn't pick it up right away. Like even that small action required acknowledgement. My mother didn't look down. She kept her eyes on me, studying, measuring, trying to find something familiar. We were going to explain everything, she said.
Soft.
Controlled. Still holding on to a version where this could be smoothed over. You told me there was nothing, I said. And I let that sit. Because that was the only sentence that mattered. No added emotion. No accusation. Just the truth of what had happened. There was a pause. Longer this time. Heavier. My sister shifted slightly. Not relaxed anymore. Not distant. Just aware. It was more complicated than that, my mother said. Complicated. That word used to end things. Used to signal that I should trust her and step back. But now, it just sounded like avoidance. It isn't, I said. And that was the moment everything settled into place. Not louder. Not sharper. Just finished. My father finally picked up the papers. Turned a page. Then another. Slow. Quiet. Like he was confirming something he already knew. My mother didn't stop him. Didn't interrupt. Because she couldn't. Not without contradicting what was right in front of her. I've already started the process, I added. Everything is moving forward properly. My sister finally spoke. Soft. Careful. You didn't have to do that, she said. And I understood exactly what she meant. Not the words, the meaning underneath them. You weren't supposed to act. You weren't supposed to question. You were supposed to stay where you always stayed. I did, I said. And that was enough. No one argued. No one raised their voice. Because there was nothing left to debate. The truth wasn't something I was asking them to accept. It was something they could no longer control. Over the next few weeks, everything unfolded quietly. No drama, no confrontation, just correction. Documents processed, accounts divided, assets transferred exactly as written. Not generously, not harshly, just fairly. The way it had always been intended. My parents didn't fight it. They couldn't. Not without exposing something they clearly didn't want to explain. So instead, they adjusted. My mother became more careful, less decisive in the way she spoke to me. Like she was learning, slowly, that I wasn't someone she could arrange anymore. My father stayed quiet, but different, less certain, less removed. Like he understood something had shifted, even if he didn't say it. My sister kept her distance. Not cold, not defensive, just aware. And that awareness said more than anything else could have. Months later, I drove past my grandmother's house. It had been sold, changed, no trace of what it used to be. But I pulled over anyway, sat there for a moment, looking at it. And I thought about something she said that afternoon by the window. You've always understood more than you say. I finally understood what she meant. Not just noticing, not just understanding quietly, but choosing when it mattered, and not stepping back from it. Now, when I think about everything that happened, I don't focus on what I almost lost, or what was taken. I think about the moment I stopped accepting things that didn't feel right just because they were presented calmly. That was the real change. If something in your life feels quietly wrong, pay attention to it. That feeling is usually there for a reason. And if this story stayed with you, there are more like it. You can subscribe if you want to hear them. There's another one waiting for you right here.